Hello everyone, Nerd Squared here. This is going to be a post commentary over one of my speedruns. The run I'll be commentating today is my latest personal best in the Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe with any percent, which is at a 3840 in this run. And there's a couple of reasons I decided to do this post commentary. One, so that people who don't know the game very well understands what's going on, like if you're a new viewer and whatnot. And also, so I can use this as a potential submission video for marathons in the future. So we'll go ahead and play this. Wait. There we go. Okay. So you'll notice I'm going through some settings here at the beginning. But this game is one of those games where you can get multiple endings. And this game, with the way that we do this, with the route that we use in this run, it becomes basically impossible to do this route unless we completely reset our save data. So we have to make sure we reset our save before every run, and if you're submitting to the leaderboards, you have to include that in the run video. And before we get to the main run, I want to mention one other thing. You'll notice there, when I was setting the settings, that there was a point where you had to set the time. I set the time to 12:02 a.m., which is important for reasons I'll explain later. It just sets some dialogue up for later in the run. And time starts here as soon as I start moving. Although I had to reset here once because the auto splitter, which there is an auto splitter for this game, it works a little finicky in terms of starting time. Because sometimes it can start early there during the load screen, or during the cutscene when you're trying to skip it. But I got it to work this time. Okay, so as I said, it's a game about getting multiple endings. This run in particular, any percent, revolves around doing some of the new content that this version adds, because this is kind of a reimagining of the original Stanley Parable from around 9 years ago. And to access that new content, we have to get 3 endings first for that point in the game to trigger. So we're going to get 3 endings really quick here in the first 3 minutes. And we chose these 3 endings in particular because they're the fastest to get. This first part is pretty straightforward. We just go into the cargo room here and then go in this vent. And we're gonna land in this room and find out that the narrators all lie. It's just some tape recordings. So we just deactivate the tape player there, and that starts this line of dialogue from the narrator. It was one of the best parts of the game, by the way. Kevin Briding is the voice of the narrator, and he did a pretty good job with it. You'll see that a lot in the run. There's some pretty good moments with the narrator, which is part of why I like running this game, because you get a lot of good fourth wall breaking moments with him and whatnot. So, in a little bit, I'm going to do a trick that involves some pretty rapid pausing and unpausing, so epilepsy warning. But in the next bit, I'm going to do 2 endings at once. But how is that possible, you might ask? Well, if you pause during a certain time in an ending we'll be getting in a second, you can overlap 2 endings. And I'll explain the technical details about how that works in a second, once you see it. Okay, there we go. So one of the endings that I got there was called the reluctant ending. The reluctant ending is you enter the or exit the office and then immediately go back in the office. But what I did there was I paused with the basically spam pause in order to pause at just the right moment where I'm still able to explore the office, but the game thinks I'm going for the reluctant ending. And once the line, Stanley simply couldn't handle the pressure plays, I have about 52 seconds until the game auto-resets after I get the reluctant ending. So while that's happening, I'm going to go over here to the cargo room again, and then as soon as that 52-second counter is over, I'm going to fall to my death here to get my third ending, which is called the death or powerful ending. So there we go, I just died, but the auto reset kicks in. So I get two endings at once right there, because once I die there, the game considers the powerful ending to be complete. So we get both the powerful and reluctant ending there. So now we've got our three endings. We get to the new content, which is very appropriately marked by the door labeled new content. The funny thing about this game, since it is a reimagining, sort of the Stanley Parable, is that it riffs on the fact that it's a reimagining. So you'll see some aspects of that later. Like I said, this game has a lot of big fourth wall breaking moments, because it's one of those games where it's very meta in its humor. So yeah, well, this section is pretty much on rails. We can't really do anything here. We have to wait on this cart until we get to an elevator that'll lead us to the new content. And here's a pretty interesting glitch we get to do once we get to the new content area. And this glitch, it's not going to seem like much once you realize what the effects are when I explain it, but for this game, it's going to be a big deal, trust me.
I'm very excited to see the thrilling new Ultra Deluxe content. Okay, so far it's an elevator. Nothing special yet, but I'm sure it's just the beginning of a mesmerizing adventure.
This is a definitely not broken elevator. Like I said, this game riffs on it being a reimagining, so there's a lot of fourth wall breaking moments like that.
Should we be moving somewhere or... Oh, there we go.
It's like a big meta commentary on not only video games, but I'd say the video game community as a whole. You'll see a bit of that later. It's pretty funny.
I have to say, initial impressions of Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe, mostly tedious. It's as if
Pretty good lines from the narrator. We'll see a lot of that in this run. Alright, so this is new content. It's this circle where we can jump in the middle of it. But I'm gonna do a sort of pause buffer trick here. So similarly to how I did the ending storage or ending overlap earlier, if you pause at the right time in the jump circle here, you'll see that there's this press space to jump command. Well, if I pause at the right time here as I exit the circle, there we go. You'll see that the command or prompt to jump is still there when I get out of the circle. What that means there is I'm able to jump outside of that circle. Now, what's really cool about this is this jump storage is what the glitch is called. This will not go away for the rest of the game. It only resets if I completely close out of the game and then re-enter it. And the reason that's so game-breaking and why it's such a big deal for the Stanley Parable in particular is because this game, it is a walking simulator after all. So the game is not designed around you being able to jump outside of the jump circle. So that allows us to break the game in some pretty interesting ways later, just by jumping to get around obstacles and invisible walls. In particular, in the section after this, there's some pretty cool out-of-bounds platforming you get to do with the jump, now that we have jump storage.
And don't get me started on the level of craftsmanship that's gone into it. In fact, I'm looking right now at the game's achievements, and it's hard to believe one of them actually says, "Test achievement, please ignore." What quality assurance department signed off on this? I'm infuriated and I'm offended, and I intend to find these...
Like I said, it's a big meta commentary on game development in the gaming community. Pretty good stuff.
It could never have lived up to such expectations. If you're still with me, why don't we just...
There's a lot of good moments like that in this run, which is why I think it would be an enjoyable run for a marathon, like GDQ in particular, but obviously including online events as well.
Having a great time together like always. What do you say, friend?
So now the game is going to reset after we find that sign. So the narrator is very disappointed by that new content that we saw, so he's gonna instead bring us to this area called the Memory Zone, which is basically a showcase of the original Stanley Parable from 2013. A lot of memorabilia and whatnot related to that game.
And how much better the Stanley Parable used to be.
And so like, even outside of, like, the meta commentary aspect of the game and it being fourth wall breaking, it's actually really cool looking back on all of this.
I call it
Stanley Parable, the original 2013 one, by the way, is very, very good. Even if you don't have an interest in Ultra Deluxe, I highly recommend you at least try the 2013 version.
Experiences like the launch of the Stanley Parable on PC.
Yeah, in terms of speed tech, there's not too much we can do here. We can explore a bit because we have infinite jumps basically, but its section is essentially on rails because we have to. There's this set of double doors on the left side of this room, and we can't go through that door just yet because the door does not open. Those double doors don't open until this set of dialogue from the narrator is done. And that'll be the case for the next couple of sections. But once we get past this, we get to do a pretty interesting sequence break with jump storage.
It was Skyrim, it was Persona 3, it was all of them, and now it's nothing. It's no games at all. It isn't even the Stanley
Shouts to
Parable
Persona 3,
anymore.
by the way.
Just a husk.
I find it weird how he mentions that game specifically in this bit of dialogue. Like, you can't write that stuff. So shouts to Persona 3.
Here's another moving passage, this time from GameSpot.com. The Stanley Parable.
Alright, so this is the last bit of dialogue from the narrator that we have to sit through before we really are able to break things. Because we're going to go to this secret passageway off to the side once the narrator's dialogue is done. And which is where a bunch of Steam reviews of the original game are. I'm very sorry if your review was featured in this section because you just got roasted by the narrator. But we have to sit in a building while we watch some of these Steam reviews be read out by the narrator, but there's some invisible walls that we can jump on to get outside of those buildings. The first one would be in the shack here, but because we have infinite jumps, we can jump on this pallet, then jump on this fence, and do some sneaky platforming to get outside of the shack. So we can skip watching the first review. We can't just skip to the next part though, because the map doesn't fully load. The map only loads like sections at a time, depending on where the narrator's dialogue is. So we have to wait for that narrator's line to finish before the next part of the map loads, as you saw there. So we're gonna skip this Steam review read as well, but it's a little trickier than the first one, because we have to jump on this wire to gain a lot of height in order to jump on top of the warehouse here, and that jump is a lot tighter than it looks, and it's not just one of those tricks where you have infinite tries to get it. You basically only have until the end of the dialogue is finished to be able to get the trick, and even then you are on an even tighter time limit than you might think, because if you end up out of bounds once the line is done and the map loads in while you're out of bounds, you're pretty much stuck. So it's a lot tighter than it looks, but there's a pretty consistent method for it. And that saves a lot of time there, those two skips, because if we sat in the first shack, we'd have to wait for the sign that had the Steam review on it to fall over and then walk through. And also with the first one, or the second one, if we just waited in the warehouse, we have to wait for the door to open before we could exit. So that saves about half a minute for both skips combined. So the second Steam review that the narrator is reading referred to a skip button because they thought the narrator's voice was annoying. So again, keeping with the theme of the game having a lot of meta commentary to it, the narrator magically puts a skip button in. And we're going to see a lot of this over the next 4 minutes or so, because to progress through this part of the game, the memory zone is what it's called, we have to hit the skip button a lot. And as you can see here, the amount of time the button skips keeps getting longer and longer. And pretty soon by the end of this, in about a few minutes, it's going to turn into a deserted planet where we're at right now.
Oh my goodness, I have someone to talk to again. Stanley, I think it's been...
So for an actual marathon run of this would be a good point for like banter or donations, because this goes on for a fair bit.
Oh, hello, it's you.
About 2.5 more minutes, and then we'll end up in that deserted planet area. Oddly enough, this section turns into a bit of a horror game in this part, because what happens with this area, and which is interesting, because I saw this in like I think it was a Boundary Break episode of this game on YouTube. Shouts to Shazez. I found out in a Boundary Break video of this game that actually each of these rooms that we're going into after we skip, it's their own separate room, and so when you hit the button, the game teleports you to the next room in the sequence. This game, like, even going outside of the meta commentary stuff, which is a big appeal of the game, it's actually very well made. I have to give props to Crows, who are the developers of this, and Davey Reedon, who did a lot of the writing for this, because they did a very good job with it. Like, honestly, this is probably the smartest writing I've ever seen in a video game. Meta commentary stuff and some other stuff included. So yeah, we're continually skipping. Just gonna go on for about another minute, and then we'll be able to move on in the game. But yeah, I was kind of saying earlier, this game kind of turns into a horror game because some of these later rooms, as you can see, are really dark. And I think in a couple of iterations of this room after this one, you'll start to hear like monster-like cries running throughout the facility, or going throughout the room that we're in. I mean. Alright, so we'll do 2 more after this one, and then we'll end up in the desert. Once we get in the desert, there's not much we can do to speed it up. The game kind of automatically ends once we get to that part after around 45 seconds or so. Yep, so there we go. We're in the desert now, and we have to wait for about 45-50 seconds until it's done. You can fool around and jump on the building that we end up in there because of the fact that we have infinite jumps still, but usually in runs I just decide to walk forward in the desert for a bit. Because this takes the same amount of time every time, so you can do whatever you want. So that's the end of that right there. Alright, so now that's the memory zone done. Now we get to start of a really crazy section of the run, because that new content door that we went through before has an update now. It's new content. So because of all that Ultra Deluxe, also we can jump out of the carriage there because of jump storage. But yeah, because the narrator earlier was so disappointed at the Ultra Deluxe content being so lackluster, he's created a new area for us to explore, which again is the game riffing on itself being an expansion of the original Stanley Parable. So the narrator here is going to show us the new features that he's added to the Stanley Parable 2. Which in a weird way makes Ultra Deluxe a sequel, but you know, to each their own, I guess.
Which is why I'm very proud to announce for the first time ever the Stanley Parable 2.
This is a very mind-blowing part of the game when you play it for your first time. Like I said, big fourth wall breaking game. If you look closely there, I skipped past it there because it's slow to look at the slideshow there. But if you look at that presentation, it shows the Stanley Parable 2 logo in a bunch of different fonts. And there's like one shown in the Last of Us style font. I think one of them shows in the Uncharted style. And then there's another one in Comic Sans. It's pretty cool. So the big thing that this expo bit, as it's called, introduces is these figurines I'll be grabbing, as you can see with that collectible area in the back. I'll explain a bit more about that in a second, but first we have a precise trick coming up. This part isn't precise, jumping on that railing, it's pretty easy, because again, jump storage. But once I get to the top here, I'm going to do a precise jump out of bounds. So when you get to the top of this area in the atrium, or auditorium I guess I could call it, once you enter those doors to my right, there's a cutscene that's supposed to trigger. But instead, I'm going to do a precise jump here to trigger it from out of bounds, outside of the auditorium. Took me a few tries, but I got it first try right there. So the reason that's so precise is, as you saw, I had to jump in mid-air, which is a very tight window. And I also had to move diagonally there, relative to the wall, in order to hit the trigger for the cutscene. But yeah, what's going to happen here as I explore the expo is, the narrator, or at least is supposed to show me some of the new features that he's implemented, until he eventually turns the game into Stanley Parable 2, which I know that sounds weird, but roll with it. But I hit the cutscene trigger from out of bounds instead, because I want to go over here to grab this figurine, or Stanlerines as they're called. The objective for the next part of the game now is going to be to collect 6 of these, and you normally have to go, for this part, you'd have to go out of your way normally to this collectible area to grab the Stanlerine, but instead, I'm going to grab it while the cutscene is playing, which is why I hit the cutscene from out of bounds with that tight jump. And I'm going to grab it as soon as the cutscene ends, just to avoid having to go out of my way to collect it. Saves around half a minute to 40 seconds.
I wanted more than anything to create a sequel that would capture all the magic of the first game. I wanted fans to love it. No matter how good these gags are, they wouldn't stand on their own. They would need the...
And it's kind of tight, actually, when you do grab the collectible, because you just grab it after the last dialogue line from the narrator, and then the game immediately auto-resets, because once this cutscene ends, the game auto-resets. So if you end up missing it in a run when doing this setup, it's really sad.
But it would need a really, really tremendous title screen. A title screen that says with bold and uncompromising conviction, "This is the Stanley Parable 2." Let me see if I can whip something up. All right, perfect. Go ahead. Take a look.
Alright. So the game is now Stanley Parable 2. It's not Ultra Deluxe anymore. Don't worry about it. So now, like I said earlier, now our goal is to collect 6 of those figurines like the one I just got in the expo. There's some really cool strats you get to do when we get the collectibles. Also, in that expo area is a bucket that I could have gotten, and once I do collect it, it would have shown up in a pedestal there in that office area I was just in. So a potential donation incentive for this could be to grab the bucket in the expo and then get it on subsequent trips through the office. So I'm going to grab my second Stanlerine here, which I can jump to because of jump storage. So I did a little trick there. Once I grabbed the Stanlerine, I paused the game during the collection cutscene here. That lets me move while this cutscene is playing. Normally you can't move during this cutscene. And I'm trying to do blind movement here after getting the Stanlerine to go up the stairs to go where the next figurine is. I unfortunately failed it because doing that blind movement is kind of difficult. But if you do it correctly, the blind movement, you can get all the way up these stairs before the cutscene ends. I'm going to do another blind movement here after getting this figurine. But this one is a lot easier. You just have to like move backwards basically. and adjust your movement occasionally to get out of that bathroom where the Stanley was.
I think I like that.
And if you do it right,
Stanley under your belt.
you end up right here next to the boss's office.
Stepping into his manager's office,
I'm going to input a keypad code here, which is 2845. That unlocks the store where the next figurine is. But I have to wait for a bit before the door opens, so I'm going to just jump around the office while I wait. We're going to get similar to Portal 2 where we get the smooth jazz, we're going to get some calming new age music, as the subtitle says. And then the door will open.
Feeling soothed and rejuvenated, Stanley calmly walked forward into the opened passageway.
So we'll grab our first, or my fourth Stanley there. I'm going to reset by hitting begin the game again there, after getting the Stanley. That'll reset me back to the office at the beginning, so I can avoid having to run all the way back there once I get that fourth one. So the last two we're going to get here are in this cargo room. The first one I'm going to get is on some plank platforms to the left. And then the sixth and last one is going to be on room to the side, which involves me taking the cargo lift to get there.
Stanley was so bad at following directions,
So I'm gonna, thankfully, we can, or conveniently, we can take a shortcut there by just jumping over that barrier, again, because of jump storage. So I got that one, and I'm gonna auto-reset, or not auto-reset, but begin the game again to reset myself back to the office. That will let me go back to the cargo room so I can avoid having to jump back up to get the sixth Stanley. Because not only would I have to jump back up there, I'd also have to wait through the collection cutscene where the narrator says a lot of dialogue.
Stanley was so bad at following directions, it's incredible he wasn't 5 years ago. Look, Stanley, I think perhaps we've gotten off on the wrong foot here. I'm not your enemy, really, I'm not.
This jump is a little tight, so I use a visual cue where as soon as the yellow cargo lift gets above that bottom railing, I go for the jump. You can go a little earlier than that with that jump, but it's kind of tight. Because if you miss it, then you fall to your death, and you have to go back and get the figurine. So I'm going to reset there, which will put me back to the office after getting that sixth figurine. And this initiates a new ending. It's similar to the memory zone bit that we did earlier, but it's going to be a little different because it's going to involve us going back through all those figurines that we just collected. Because again, meta commentary about games and whatnot. The narrator here is obsessed with us getting the figurines, so he wants to so he wants to relive that memory here. And I set myself up there in front of that portal that leads to the memory zone, because if you go too far forward within that portal, the memory zone won't load and you're soft locked. So you kind of have to set yourself a bit farther back there to avoid soft locking.
The first collectible. Back then we had no idea of how many of them we'd find. Sure, it said 6 right there on the screen.
Unlike the first trip getting the Stanley though, you can avoid picking up most of these as we go along here. Like these first two you can just completely ignore, because it doesn't progress in narrator's dialogue at all, getting these. You can also do a little bit of a swag strat there. Again, because we have jump storage, we can jump on those railings, so we can do a little shortcut there to save a bit of time. I messed it up, but it's fine if you don't get it there in that particular instance, because that black void doesn't go away until the narrator's dialogue is done. And the narrator's dialogue there takes a bit, so even though I missed it, I still didn't lose any time. I did freak out though when that happened live doing the run, because I thought I lost a bit of time doing that, but turned out to not waste any time.
Let's see, what came next? Oh yes.
This one also you can just ignore.
Oh well, I can't
So
actually
we
say
just
I
skip
remember
past that
being in this
Stanley.
room, but it's here in the memory zone, so it must have happened.
This part's pretty funny.
This is the fifth
To
mini-zone,
commemorate
and
us
this
getting
one
our
is really
5th
something special.
Stanley here,
Speaking of
or I guess
warehouse, I
8th
remember
actually,
it so clearly. In
the
fact,
narrator is going to
because
create a
this
fun
one is
video for us.
particularly special to me, I
So let's
made
see
a
the end
little
result of
video
his
to
work.
commemorate the occasion. Enjoy.
This is the best cutscene in the game, by the way. It's personally my favorite, anyway. Besides the Persona 3 name drop earlier in the run. Yo, it's mini stand number 5! I did find an inner cargo lift. That is correct. Best boy, the narrator. Alright.
Takes you back, doesn't it?
Cutscene
I
over.
spent
We
a
can
lot of
move
time
on with
making
going
that
through the
video,
memory
but
zone.
It was 8 minutes I wouldn't have spent on anything else.
So one annoying thing with this game and optimizing it, besides the jump storage, since it is a kind of precise trick,
Then we came to the last
and
the final figurine, right
the
here
blind
by the
movement,
red and blue door.
is actually just going through doors, because you obviously you want to go through it at the first possible moment, but you can't just like rub up against doors, because if you do that, the door won't open, which I've definitely encountered a few times in the first memory zone. But so you kind of have to wait for the door to open, and then as soon as it starts opening, then you can go through it. Otherwise, the door won't open because you're pressed up against it, and you just lose time. Get a really cool effect here with the camera mirroring itself in the TV. It actually does that in the main menu too, fun fact. But you never get to see it properly. Because again, it's a fixed camera angle on the main menu. It's kind of funny here, the narrator just interrupts the loading screen. Because he can't get enough of the figurines, so we're just going to go through the memory zone backwards. Go through all of them again.
Okay, yes, the room with the red and blue doors. I remember this. I must say, of all the figurines we looked at in our initial tour of the memory zone, this one is the most distinct and clear in my mind. Let's keep going, I want more. And here's where I made that video. Don't you remember the video we watched?
I got a little stuck to get the video again. Except like 5 times speed or something.
I love that video.
Yeah, I lost a little bit of time there because I got stuck trying to round that corner next to the shelves, but didn't waste that much, so not a huge deal. And again, we can ignore these figurines on our way back, because the dialogue will progress here, no matter if we get them or not. Except for this one in the bathroom, we do have to grab it.
If there had been any kind of reward for finding all of these, it really would have
And you can see I'm positioning myself there by crouching. That's again to avoid preventing the door from opening by rubbing up against it. As I go down these stairs, I'm going to take another shortcut by jumping on the railing. So you can just round the corners like that and fall down real quickly, instead of having to walk down the stairs.
This is it, the very first one we found in the exhibit where I introduced you to the figurines. Oh, I want more memories,
Alright.
Stanley. I want to keep going.
So pretty soon, oh yeah, new content area by the way. If you forgot this from before, well, here it is. But yeah, at the end of this sequence where we go back through the figurines that we collected, we're going to end up in Stanley's office, good old number 427. And once we get to that point, some dialogue from the narrator is going to start. I'm going to reset the game by pressing begin the game again. At a certain point in this dialogue, basically there's going to be 2 cuts to black here.
Is there anything else?
And I'm going to quit the game, or begin the game again, and then quit the game as soon as that second cut to black happens. So we have this first cut to black here.
Yes, I'm remembering something now.
There's going to be a second cut to black in a second.
Story got started. Back then I was different. I used to make big decisions. I was passionate. I was skeptical. I weighed each decision with profound.
Alright, so we got the cut to black there, so I'll begin the game again. Just so the game splits there in the auto splitter. And I'm going to quit to menu. Because the last piece of the puzzle for getting the ending we're trying to get for this run is we have to restart the game a few times. So you'll see me close and reopen the game a lot here. Because if you remember at the beginning when I set my settings, that's actually an entity in the game, or a being in the game that's talking to us, a character. Good old settings, sliders. I don't know what the name of this character is. I'll just go with settings character. The settings character here is an actual character in the game that talks to us. And to get this last piece of the puzzle, which is the epilogue ending, we have to get certain specific dialogue options or dialogue conversations with this settings character. So we first set the time there to 11:59 p.m. and then we're gonna quit again and then set the time to 11:57. And he'll give us a few and the settings character will give us some sliders to mess around with. We'll get some dialogue with him, then we'll quit out to the main menu. We'll quit out and then reopen again. And then once we get that third extra line of dialogue, the epilogue will unlock, which is how we're going to finish the game. Again, with this whole game being a meta commentary on gaming and such, the game actually has this opening settings screen as a character. Alright, so we just had our second set of dialogue there. We're gonna quit out and reopen again and get our third set of dialogue. And after this, or not after this, but a little bit after this, the epilogue will unlock. Because we'll do this third set of dialogue and another set of dialogue after that, and the epilogue will unlock. And I set the time at 12:02 a.m. at the beginning, because if you set the time to exactly midnight, you'll get different dialogue from the settings character, which will waste time. So we do 12:02 for the first one, 11:59 for the second, 11:57 for the third set of dialogue, and then after that we don't have to set the time again. Alright, so we just got our third set of dialogue there. We'll do our last set of dialogue here, and then the epilogue will unlock. And the epilogue, once we do get there, is pretty straightforward, but there is some tech you can do to save a bit of time, which mainly revolves around knowing where to go and like moving in optimal lines. Because again, walking simulator, after all. And we can't do jump storage. We can't utilize jump storage to sequence break in this part, because at this point in the run, there's no good way to set it up. And because we did close out of the game as part of this dialogue setup we're doing, that unfortunately does get rid of the jump storage, so we can't carry it over from the earlier portions of the run. So we are going to have to do like straightforward walking simulator movement here once we load into the epilogue. There we go, we just got into the epilogue. So like I said, it is pretty straightforward movement, because for the similarly to how I was cycling through the different rooms earlier with the skip button, I'm gonna have to walk forward for a bit here for about 2 minutes, and as I'm doing that and walking forward, it will cycle through a bunch of different versions of this desert area I'm walking through, which in terms of speed tech is pretty straightforward, but in terms of watching it, it's actually really cool, because it cycles through a bunch of different cool set pieces. Like I'll switch from this desert to a desert with a campfire and an office chair there. And once we get through here and cycle through all these different set pieces, it will bring up and off in the distance will appear a version of the memory zone from before, but it's going to be similarly to the skip button room from earlier. It's going to be all deserted and filled with sand. Since this section is pretty straightforward and we're just walking for a bit, I want to shout out a few people. I mentioned Crows, and Davey Reedon, who are the creators and writers, respectively, of the game. Huge shout out to them, honestly, for making this. It's probably my favorite game of 2022. Really smart and interesting writing, and with this epilogue ending and the new content they put in particular, it was honestly pretty, like, I guess thought-provoking is the phrase I'm looking for. It was just really cool to play the first time. I also want to shout out Mifa and Joshua and a generic name, who are some of the top runners for this. They were a big help when I was learning the game initially. So yeah, there's the rundown version of the memory zone that I was talking about. And while the movement here is straightforward because we don't have jump storage anymore, there is some optimizations we can do here. This first part isn't too bad, but we're coming up here after we go through this doorway. We're going to go through a cavern, which will lead to a computer where the settings character is, who we're gonna talk to for one last time. And these caves, even if you're a speedrunner of this, can be kind of confusing to navigate. There's been multiple times in this, even though I have experience in this game for about 100 hours now, where I get lost. In fact, in this run, you'll see me get lost for a little bit, because there's this cavern off to my left here, but because I'm not entirely used to doing this area fast just yet, I got kind of lost there and I had to correct myself. And you'll see in this little entrance here, there's some Stanley floating about. Collecting these isn't necessary, strictly speaking, but I collect a couple there just so they're not in my way when I go through that opening. And yeah, here's the settings character again. We're gonna talk to him on this computer. And a funny thing about this part is, as you'll see here in this dialogue, he wants the Stanley Parable to continue, so from now on, after beating this, each time you reboot the game, you're prompted to select a random, basically ad-libbed subtitle for a new version of the Stanley Parable, and we pick whichever one is fastest there, which is the top two options. In that case, I got expired content, which is pretty funny. And time is going to be pretty soon. After we go through these, I have to go through this dialogue with the settings character. Once the load screen starts, when the game auto resets to the title screen. So that'll be in about 12 seconds. And we don't have to bother saying the time there, so we just say it's at midnight. And there we go. That's the end of the run. Yeah, good old Stanley Parable 3 expired content. So that's the end of the run right there. That's Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe. I hope this was informative in some way, and for anyone watching this that's on a games committee for a marathon, I hope you consider my run. Thank you guys for watching.